Okay, so thank you, Christoph, for taking the time. So this is Christoph Klutsch, and I'm Daria Majewski, and we both wrote an essay on the effects of COVID-19, or rather, we wrote an essay with our associations on COVID-19, what we think about this whole time, right?
Yes.
And yeah, the idea was because like Christoph gave me his essay and I read it and was like, wow, okay, it's different, but some similarities are there in our thinking,
yes.
I think. And this kind of amazed me, and yeah, I thought we could talk maybe on our essays, maybe questions we have to what the other person wrote, and maybe why Abject. I think abject is the word like that combines all of our thinking. Abject is something that we feel is connected to COVID-19.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. So for me it was very same experience as Daria when I read her essay, that a lot of that resonated with me. We are stuck in a situation right now in 2020 where we are confronted with Corona. We are confronted with social movements, we are confronted with political struggles. We see a lot of disturbing things happening in 2020, and it made me really think about the current situation as everybody, but I was trying to find something to hold on to better understand what we are actually facing here. And that's when I, and I guess you also came to the notion of the object as a concept which helps us to understand possibly the situation a little bit better.
Well, I have to admit that when I came here to the Coart 19, I was preparing myself to think about the virus and the social riots we're experiencing. And I didn't think about the abject in the beginning. Like, I worked on the abject a few years ago, trying to explain why being a trans woman is so strange. So it's kind of an oxymoron in the society. And then I put the abject away and I entered the Dorama Villa and I saw this table, I think you made it, the book table. And there was like Powers of Horror by Christoph. Honest, like boom, that's the key I need. So I started to read and to write. And then I saw your essay. I remember the first Atabla last Saturday, you started talking about the objection and the virus, and it's like, wow, okay. Christoph is like thinking in the same direction, yeah.
Yes.
But for me, it just came together here.
So, how did it come together for you here?
With this objection thing. So, well, I felt before I came here, I felt the riots we are experiencing, the Black Lives Matter, but also the Polish Stonewall. It's called Polish Stonewall. Just happened in August when like an activist, an LGBTQ activist, a non-binary person got imprisoned by the police for putting flags on how do you say, Denkmäler?
Statues, memorials.
On statues and memorials, and for destroying a homophobic bus. And this came huge riots because like, you know, people couldn't look at it like being her imprisoned and maybe she will face up to 7 years just for fighting for human rights. And then was like, wow, okay, this happened now in August, and a few months earlier Black Lives Matter movement or the riots in the US began, and both riots were facing harsh police brutality. And this in the time of Corona. And then I started to think why the abject came in, that maybe these groups are kind of abjected from, in the societal way, they are kind of abjected. And in the moment when the virus came up, and we all kind of, I'm writing about it in my essay, maybe I will have to explain it later, we all kind of faced a sort of abjection, because everybody, doesn't matter if a young body or an old body, a healthy body or a sick body, became a possible carrier of the virus. So there was kind of a equalization in being abjected, which gave power to, in my thinking, power to those riots to rise up and say, okay, but now we're strong enough to come for you and come for our rights, because now you're weak too. And how for you? Like, same question back. How did
Same question, and I answered differently yet similarly, but with a different vocabulary. I think for me, what I saw was solidarity emerging. How so? So we have if you look into the concept of the object, which is an object is something that, in my understanding, is something that was part of a subject prior and has been detached and has not become an object yet. For example, my human body is a subject. I consider myself as a person, as a subject. If a hair of mine falls into the soup, we are responding with horror and disgust. People kind of respond very strongly about that part, which was part of me, but it's not just an object yet. It's not like a leaf falling from the tree into a soup where people don't have an issue with. So that object is something which has been detached from a subject and is not quite as innocent as an object. So that structure of the object, I think, is an extraordinarily powerful word, which can then, of course, be translated into other contexts and explains horror in general. So if we have, I don't know, Walking Dead or scary things, what we usually probably know from pop culture and so forth. More interesting it becomes in sociological, sociopolitical, gender discourses, racial discourses and so forth, where we suddenly can better understand objects. We objectify subjects. People who are members of our society are treated as if they are objects, because we object them from our society, right? So we say, you are not equal to us, so therefore we push you away, detach you from us, can exclude you from the society we define as a majority, and then define that as an object. So that is something which is a powerful tool, and I think that resonates a little bit with what you described as people who are objected from society.
Yeah. And this was for me, like when you writing in your essay on the first side, that the panic we are experiencing, we do it as individuals and a collective, but as well the individuum as the collective you treat as subjects, right? So you treat collective as a subject too. And this thinking makes it possible to think about objection in society, right? So certain groups are objected, and this was for me, it was like kind of a relief reading this in your essay to feel, okay, yeah, somebody else is thinking this too, because I don't know how you feel. I found it quite hard to take Christopher's analysis as she's doing it. She's writing about sin, she's writing about all these things basically in her essay, Powers of Horror, but it's not used very often in analyzing society. It's kind of like people forgot it, or I don't know, they are not thinking objection as a tool, as you say, a powerful tool to understand society. So I was happy to read it in your essay. Like what was, in my opinion, very strong about your text, or what was daring, kind of, you already mentioned it, is the moment of solidarity that came up, and you think you're writing it's a change of paradigm. Do you say it like that in English? Like
paradigm?
Paradigm, a change of paradigm. Would you like to say more about that?
If you ask what was society before, let's say before that moment of Corona, which changed our society radically, and what are we in now, and what do we anticipate in the future? Something drastically changed. We have been witnessing the appearance of that virus, which itself can be understood as an object that kind of travels through my body, leaves the body, enters another body, leaves that body, and so forth. So it's kind of entering subjects, exiting as objects, becoming object, entering a subject again. So the virus is kind of a wonderful metaphor for that itself. How do we respond to that? I think what we saw is a huge act of solidarity in the last couple of months, where we as society decided to come together and protect those people who are most vulnerable in our society. That is typically thought of in medical terms right now as people with pre-existing conditions, elderly members of society, and so forth. So to protect them, we came together as a society, as a collective, as human, as the human race, really, because we did it globally. It was not just Germany and France and China and the US and others, but it was we as a human race are trying to fight this. And that was really something new, and it was an experience which made me really kind of reflect on, well, why didn't we do that before? And what was society before? In this kind of capitalistic society where everybody is kind of striving for their own profit, where we are individualized, we are separated. Capital has a tendency to distinct individuals. You kind of individualize them so that they are in this kind of panic survival mode, so they buy more to compensate and so forth. And suddenly we have this extraordinary act of solidarity. Yet we do this in isolation. Right? So the way we show our solidarity is to stay alone.
That's so strange.
Which is very strange, right? So we object ourselves in a way from society. We remove ourselves from social life to protect social life, to show solidarity. There is a kind of a paradox here, which makes me really think, what are we witnessing now? What is emerging on that global scale really the first time? And of course, where will that lead in the future? So in a way that makes me very optimistic, because I think we are at this kind of moment where we have a possible paradigm shift, where we may be getting to a point where we say, well, our lives are going to change forever anyway. We will not get back to normal. There will be no normal again. There won't be a new normal either. I think there will be a different type of future, and possibly a better one.
And do you feel like this change, or maybe the riots, the human rights riots we experienced in Poland and the US, are they kind of like a first reaction to this change of paradigm? Is it like something the paradigm change already produced? Or would you rather say, be careful with this link?
What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's like that. I think maybe it's just by accident we experienced 2 huge riots in 1 year, but I don't think like we're having the COVID-19 pandemic and experiencing Black Lives Matter and the Polish Stonewall. It's too much at once, right? It should just be by accident. And I think, as I also see the theory of objection as something how we can understand what is happening, I see the link between the equalization of everybody through the coronavirus. As you said, everybody had to stay at home or had to get isolated to distance. It was to everybody. You couldn't just say, oh, it's only the gay people, it's only the black people, it's only the disabled who are suffering for something, but everybody was, I mean, it's coming through the air everybody breathes, right? So it's something everybody is touched by, and by that weakened. So I think this experience everybody's weekend made solidarity maybe more possible to understand. In order to protect myself, my children, I have to be in solidarity with a total unknown person somewhere to calm down the virus, to lower the, you know, how they say, lower the thing.
Curve.
Lower the curve, yeah. Thank you. And so I think there might be a connection, and it might have been like two, when you look at the groups that had a riot, black people, POC people in general, indigenous people, and queer people, it's two groups that are most objected in society, like their whole, like Black Lives Matter, whole capitalism builds on slavery, right? So the people who basically were enslaved to make this whole society possible, they're rioting right now, they're not taking it anymore. Especially in the US, where it's the center of capitalism and also the form of slavery we experienced in history. Even so, it's everywhere, right? And on the other side, like with rising capitalism, patriarchy kind of changed and produced new, in my understanding of patriarchy, new gender roles with the man and the woman being like very different kinds of gender, helping each other to, you know, the women cleaning the house, taking care of the family, the man earning the money, being part of the production sphere. So this sphere produced like heterosexuality as a new norm, cisgendered people as a new form. And again, people who didn't fit in there, LGBTIQA, whatever people, queer people, were objected because they were a threat to the system. And the system, in my opinion, in capitalism, it could include gay people into capitalist logic, it can include trans people, but only to a certain barrier. And when you cross this barrier, you smash the system. And now we're experiencing queer people rioting, and the symbol figure, the front figure of this riot is a non-binary person. So it's a person which identifies in a sphere that cannot exist in the binary system. And she is the one who got imprisoned. She's now been talked about, and people in the journals write about non-binary people, how you treat them, who they are. So an identity that wasn't known at all and excluded by trans people, by gay people, by queer people. Now it's the center. And I think this has kind of an explosive power when it comes to the gender roles in capitalism. So two things, race and gender, that are basic for a capitalist society, are rioting. So I think it might be a symptom of this change of paradigm you were talking about, where solidarity, as you said, solidarity doesn't work with capitalism. So this is true, right? And now we are training to be in solidarity with people we don't even know. Yeah, so the whole capitalist system is kind of, it's fighting, right? So we're experiencing police violence, politicians doing strange stuff, or some people becoming very fascist at the same time and thinking it's only the Chinese people who bring corona, or only the people who are from the outside bring corona. So this kind of logic shows again. But I think it in kind of a explosive riot. So I hope, and I'm with you, I'm optimistic. I think we will win. I hope.
I think the fact that we all have been self-isolating in a way forced us to reflect on our situation and also remove ourselves from the social control mechanism of capitalism, which is, we are totally exposed to norms, you should do this, you shouldn't do that, you should buy this, you should surrender that. When we participate in an open society, then we are constantly kind of aware of these rules, and suddenly when we are in a lockdown and everybody is at home reflecting at their home situation, whatever that is, that might be a family situation, that might be a situation by oneself, that might be a co-living situation of all sorts, it doesn't really matter. That's what becomes the focus of that act of solidarity, removing oneself from society to self-isolate and reflect. I think in that reflection, we have the possibility to rediscover our identity, right? Where we really can go beyond the stereotypical confinements of society and become aware of our kind of racial classification, of our privilege, of our gender role, of our role in society as a patriarchalic member or somebody who's exploited or somebody who is exerting control, who's abusing, who's suffering, whatever our roles are. There are thousands of them. They have become stronger, and the heteronorm, the normality has been pushed back a little bit. I think that fueled what you're describing, this power of forces which are have been pushed to the outside and come now into the center because they kind of had the time to regroup in a way, or kind of first really kind of discover new forms of solidarity. I want to add one thing with this kind of I can't breathe, because that is another kind of obvious yet very kind of subconscious and subversive moment of connecting different elements, right? So Corona makes us, when we are affected severely, puts us in a state where we can't breathe, right? We are incubated and we are in an intensive care unit, artificially breathing machines. And the Black Lives Matter started with "I can't breathe" statement, right? Somebody was killed by a policeman kneeling on the throat of an innocent member of society, and that probably subconsciously triggered something. That fear of not breathing, which we see every day on television in relation to Corona, and at the same time you have somebody who is killed by a policeman by not being able to breathe and then being recorded, and in a way also kind of political circumstances where a lot of people now in many societies and so-called Western democracies are witnessing changes which make people who are a little bit different feel like they can't breathe there politically anymore because they don't feel like they can show who they really are. They can participate in society the way they would like to because there are repercussions, there are restrictions, there is police force answering that being different, and so there's also kind of psychologically not being able to breathe anymore, and so that I think that is another fuel. So we have several things, right? So we have this kind of we have the object, we have the solidarity and self-isolation, we have breathing, we have so-called marginal forces which come into the center and really develop that kind of explosive power to incubate change, to stay within that metaphor, right?
So maybe like a virus coming into the center and changing the DNA of society, right? How it's structured. Yeah, I think it's quite interesting to have this talk because like when sometimes it feels difficult to talk about COVID-19 as an option, as something that brings, except of pain, also potential for change. But at the same time, I feel after a few months of isolation, I mean, people still work, right? That's something too, I think, what is explosive. You have to go to work, but you cannot meet friends, lovers, whatever. So this is something that takes away your breath also, right? You cannot relax. And after all this time, I mean, like experiencing this isolation and seeing people die on the television due to Corona and the riots happening, there's a big need to talk about potential, right? It's a big it's important to start talk about what Corona might bring, what doors it might open, instead of just closing down and getting depressive at home. Thinking, and I think also like the Coart space you and Gwen and Dina opened up for a lot of artists, is a place too where you can, with all the experience of isolation and insecurity of the last month, you can come together and think in a very creative way of new ways of getting into contact or thinking creative. So it's becoming more important to ask this question. And to organize, like I think you said that now, like some of the marginalized people are organized, and I think we have to organize better to really make sure this change is on the better for everybody.
And you mentioned that you're going to be part of a demonstration soon, that you're leading a march where you're a prominent figure to
I'm just holding a speech there, yes, but I'm going there. And this march is everything I was waiting for. It's the Swobice Frankfurt-Oder Pride. And it's a pride that will happen in two cities. The city, it's one city. It's divided by the borderline of Germany and Poland. And it will start on the Polish side and end on the German side, and we will cross the bridge that connects Germany with Poland because there is a river, the Neisse. And I think this march and being part of this march, like I'm from Poland, I'm trans, I'm kind of, that's it, not everything. And so this kind of affects my identity, an identity that is something forced kind of on me, right? Like having the world divided into nations is so stupid, but it's like that. So I'm from a Polish family growing up in Germany, even though I don't like the nationality, it's so stupid, but it exists. And I'm a trans woman, two identities that also are part of this shaping the world, taking away our humanity. You mentioned it, right? Like identity is always something that takes away our humanity, because it takes our breath. It makes us men, women, black, white, Polish, German, anything, trans, cis, whatever. And now having a pride, starting in Poland, when right now it's so much governmental police violence against activists and hate on LGBTIQ people. There's the whole church, the Catholic Church in Poland, imagining the LGBTIQ as a virus basically coming from the West to destroy Poland. So we have all this, and there will happen a march, and I will speak there, and this feels so anti-fascist. Like more than a pride, more than like Polish-German solidarity, it feels like really anti-fascist, because queer people will march on the borderlines of nations claiming solidarity. So this is so anti. It's so anti the system, it's anti-nationalism, it's anti-patriarchy, it's anti-sexism, anti-everything of isms and phobias that are right now existing. So maybe it's the abject rising there, right? Something very objective, trying to become more even a subject, maybe, from the object to the subject. I'm not sure, so maybe this is too crazy, but it feels powerful. Okay. You're writing about the multiple crises. We already mentioned the coronavirus, the economic crisis, the Black Lives Matter riots and stuff. And then something I think maybe misunderstanding in the essay, wir können es auch später rausschneiden, maybe misunderstanding happened to me, that I read the crisis itself is an part of the self that lost its borders. So I showed you the German version. And when I read this, I had a very short moment, and I think it's not what is written there, but it reminded me of people who treat Corona as the punishment of Mother Nature. So, and I wanted to ask you what you think about this. Either it's meant like that, or what you think about some people saying, it's Mother Nature punishing humans for being too much. Or you think is it like that, or yeah?
No, I don't think that nature is punishing anybody. I don't think that nature is thinking that way. I don't think teleologically. I don't think in terms of creators and being good and evil and punished and medieval hell and heaven and
Oh my god!
that is not a way. But I know that a lot of people are perceiving it like this because they say we have been greedy, we have been hurting the environment, we have been as humans like a virus to planet Earth, the Matrix movies, right? And that nature is fighting back. Maybe that is a term I could live better with, instead of punishing, because that's so ethically, it's so much morals. But fighting back, maybe, there's an imbalance, and once things get out of balance, there seems to be a tendency in nature that creates ripple effects. Something gets out of balance, and then the whole system kind of destabilizes. It wobbles around, and eventually it might calm down again, or it turn into a tsunami and washes away whatever was there before. So in that term, maybe, I was here more thinking about it in terms of crisis as kind of a moment of, once we are in a situation where we're reflecting upon ourselves and look into our own identity, which for everybody is difficult and challenging and problematic, and it's not an easy thing whatsoever, to kind of have that conversation with oneself. That moments of crisis, in a way, have there's always a potential in it because it opens something. So if crisis enters into our life, or if we enter into a crisis, then something new is about to happen, because we are crossing borders. We are leaving our safe territory. Deleuze says, he's talking about territorialization and deterritorialization. So I can leave my territory, experience something else there, come back. So these kind of vagabondistic tendencies of strolling around and finding new avenues, that's kind of the first step in a larger step, thinking about Bataille and Baudrillard and so forth. We have that moment of excess, of an orgy, of something, of experiences which transport us beyond ourselves. We all know that experience of kind of losing oneself in drunkenness, in ecstasy, in orgasm, in forms of states where we lose ourselves and become part of something which is excessive and possibly even wasteful and over the top, and maybe I was trying to kind of figure out what crisis in that context would mean. I'm not quite sure about it yet, because crisis can, I think, induce those states also, but more than possibly in a horrific moment. If you think about war, if you think about concentration camps, that's the worst crime against humanity, where we are dehumanized and become reduced to collectives and then dealt with in an objective way, and suddenly humans become waste, and so there's another form of kind of crossing boundaries of identity in a most horrific ways. So it's not always, it's multifaceted. Obviously, it's a mechanism which is hyper complex. So yeah, something like that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think it's interesting that the whole issue of borders is multiply coming up in this talking about the abject in COVID-19, and now you're saying also like the expansion of borders, the crossing of borders is something you see in the crisis and can associate it to so many different parts of life where it happens too in a good way and in a bad way, right? So yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we've talked a lot. I'm not sure. It feels like we've talked a lot. We hope we didn't bore you out. And yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Well, thank you.
Thank you. Bye.